Making your own tactic on Football Manager is one of the most intimidating things about the game. And while I won't pretend to be the best, I've been making my own tactics for a long time, and it's led to a lot of success.
Town have won the Champions League! The vodka's here, Chad!
And there are certain tenets that I always abide by in order to get to that celebration at the end. The first one being you've got to understand your own squad. Because any truly great tactic doesn't start with just the shell of a tactic. It starts with a great understanding of what your squad is capable of. So for a video where you thought we'd be spending a lot of time in the tactics screen, we start in the squad screen. Don't worry, we'll get there. Now, depending on how your brain works, it could be helpful to make a strengths and weaknesses chart of some kind. But what you want to do is assess what your squad is capable of in different positions. You don't just have to be on the squad screen to do that. You can also use the squad planner. I know, nobody uses it, but it is here. And within it, there are a couple of tools if you don't want to do this manually on the squad screen. There is the squad view where you can go by position and essentially isolate each of the players at each position that you perhaps want to use. The downside of this is that it only shows you positions in the tactic you already have. So try a bunch of different presets and come in here and see you can play each position. There's also the cheeky little drop-down arrow on the tactics screen, which will provide you with a list of the same thing. But it just lacks the pretty colors, you know? There's also the report section where you can get a best 11 from literally anyone in your entire coaching staff. Just pick the person with the best judging player ability. That's this fancy little number right here. Potential doesn't matter for this. We only care about current. It also comes with an assistant report, which will tell you what your squad is good at. In the case of my Twitch stream, my squad is good at a lot of things, and what your squad's bad at, which in my squad, not a lot of things. Although we are not very brave. William Wallace would be so disappointed. For freedom! Now, there's one view I like to use over all others to help me with this, and that's general info, because not only do I have the player's best position, I also have every position they are capable of playing, because you might not be using the player in their best position, or it might be a player like Simon Mazurkovic, who can play two positions naturally, or Mickey Van de Ven, who can play left back and center back in equal measure. Once I've got that information, you basically go to every position group, your defense, your midfielders, your forwards, and your wingers, and you assess what your team's good at. Then you figure out where that heat map lights up. Where does your team have a lot of talent? Where is your team lacking? But there's something else that you need to be assessing while you're looking at your squad, because that is all relative to the other players on your team. You also need to be assessing the talent level of your team. The difference being, is this guy fast relative to the other wingers that we have on our team, or is he fast relative to the fullbacks he will be going against? And that can make a huge difference depending on whether you're managing Manchester United or Ipswich. Shout out. Really hope I didn't jinx them by recording this.
What does that taste like? That tastes like promotion!
But the idea is that in your core tactic, are you trying to literally dominate everyone you're playing, Manchester City, or are you trying to survive? Now, you should always have a tactic for if you're the favorite or if you're the underdog, but it's nice to know where your base should be. But now it's time to finally look at the tactics screen. And as we look at these little guys' faces on this little positional map of life, at the very core level, there are only two types of tactics that you need to understand when you start making one. There are balanced tactics that seek to apply pressure while also accounting for everything. And then there are unbalanced tactics, which strategically provide themselves a disadvantage in hopes of creating a greater advantage. Now, that second type of tactic gets a lot of hype, but it is often misunderstood, particularly with the fact that most tactics that people think are unbalanced are actually balanced. Now, let me give you an example. Let's take a classic 4-2-3-1. And we move this guy over here. People might be looking at this tactic and thinking, well, that tactic is obviously in the unbalanced category. But if we've got an inside forward here who's cutting into this space, a fullback or a wingback perhaps that's on support, so they're providing this, run over here. We've got a center midfielder on attack that's gonna end up in this position. Or we're creating a really balanced attack, almost a more balanced attack, by shifting this attacking midfielder over than just leaving them right in the middle. An example of an unbalanced tactic would be what I used 3 years ago on Football Manager 2021. I took a basic 4-3-3, but because we had better strikers than wingers, I move the guy up here. Now, I played him in a deeper lying role, but this obviously opens us up to danger from the left flank. Now, I counted on my right-sided midfielder, he was a world-class beast named Ansi Karolainen, to cover more of that space, and I trusted this fullback more, but this isn't a good example of inviting a bit of a problem in order to create more of a problem for the other team. Now, doing stuff like this is obviously more risky, and it requires a higher level of experience in Football Manager to be sure that you're going to get it right. It's the difference between getting a driver's license for a regular car and getting a driver's license for an 18-wheeler. The only way you'll get there is experimentation, but if things are starting to go wrong and you don't know why, definitely revert back to any sort of balanced tactic that is able to cover everything equally. If you're ever wondering if your tactic is balanced or not, just click the analysis tool. It will show you where the gaps are in your tactic and what players might be able to cover each position. So now you've finally decided the shape of your tactic that you want to have. Well, now we get to the fun part. That's only the shape of your team on defense. Obviously not exactly. These wingers in a 4-3-3 will track back in particular situations and this and that, but your team is going to look completely differently on offense. A great example of this is the tactic I've been using with Tottenham at the end of my long journeyman save on Twitch. We've been at Tottenham for a couple of years and have developed a system that looks very different in defense and in attack. You see, the role and the mentality of that role will make a huge difference in where your player actually moves. For example, I have two central midfielders in this tactic. A ball-winning midfielder on defend is never going to get within 20 yards of the goal. He's going to set the perimeter of my defense, essentially screening off any potential counterattacks. Well, a center mid on attack will very much likely be past my advanced playmaker after we have possession for more than 15 to 30 seconds. He's busting his butt all the way up the field to turn this into essentially in attack, something that looks like this. Now you notice my fullbacks also moved up in this situation. Two fullbacks on support in sustained possession are going to drift into this space here, and if they are invited to go forward, they will do so. I'm only doing that because I trust both my fullbacks. They're good athletes with good work rate that can get back to their position. If you don't want them to do that, then a wingback or a fullback on defend is going to help keep them anchored farther back. But after I've had the ball for about 30 seconds, this is what my team looks like, which is why you need to beware of putting too many players on attack. This is a mistake that I see all the time, because often you'll only be thinking about how you can get forward and score goals, and you'll be worried if you're creating a tactic for the first time that a fullback on support or a midfielder on defend is really not going to help that happen at all. But if you put all of these players on attack, like both of these fullbacks and this midfielder as well, then you're really just going to have this player and these two defenders to possess, and they're going to be passing it off players that are dropping off of your front line, because they'll all be up here and they'll have to drop back, and then if heaven forbid you have a turnover, you're woefully out of position in your rest defense. If it's helpful, you can grab a notepad or something like this and write down your tactic, and anybody that has an attacking mentality just draw a straight arrow up the field. A great real-life example is Manchester City, who a lot of times before Erling Haaland arrived would just play without a striker, but they still managed to score a lot of goals anyways. You can do that in Football Manager. You don't have to have everybody all the way up all the time. But you do want to press, because that's one of the great questions when you're creating a tactic, is to press or not to press.
That is the question.
That's in your out of possession instructions. You're going to find defensive shape, how often to press, prevent short goalkeeper distribution, things like get stuck in and where, defensive line stepping up or dropping off more. Now, pressing is more nuanced in Football Manager than a lot of people would believe. There are a lot of different factors that go into it, like the defensive ability and the energy and the work rate and the stamina of your forwards. But in general, pressing is the way to go. It's the same as real life. All of the best teams, at least for part of the match, will have a pressing system that allows them to force the tempo of the match, take control of the tempo of the match, and put pressure on the other team in possession. If you design a low block, no press tactic, it will be very difficult for you to win at the top level. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are people that do it all the freaking time. They find the right combination of players and different instructions, and it ends up working out anyway. And those sorts of tactics are very useful for one-off matches. To see out matches or to play against the Real Madrids of the world, I use this tactic with a mid-block standard and no pressing at all. I drop off more, for crying out loud. But if you are a team that is expected to lose a lot of games and you invite a ton of pressure, you're going to get absolutely destroyed. I've seen it on Football Manager a lot. If you're a good team playing a really sound low block tactic, you can still win. You're just going to struggle to score sometimes. So having a pressing option and being comfortable pressing most of the time is usually the way to go. You should at least have an option to shift your team into it and an understanding of how you can get your tactic into a pressing one. Just keep in mind, if you're ticking prevent short goalkeeper distribution, that's going to draw your players further forward. So if you do have a naturally deeper tactic, maybe it's a good idea to press hard, but not do that. But there's nothing wrong with doing nothing. Another huge mistake I see in people that are learning to make FM tactics is overdoing it. It's really inviting. You see all of these options and you feel like you need to choose one or the other, but you don't. I take a more Ancelotti style where I have a system and a way that I want my team to play, obviously, but I let my players fill in the gaps. You can dominate either way, right? I've won a lot of things on Football Manager, and people that click every single one of these instructions one way or the other have also won a ton of things on Football Manager. But if you're just dipping your toe into designing tactics, clicking a bunch of random stuff and not knowing how it's going to affect each other can be extremely harmful. Harmful. That's the word. Like Googling tactics one time and seeing that all of them use play out of defense, even though your center backs happen to suck with the ball and the other team you're playing against is very good at pressing. Don't just fall into that stuff because you see me do it on stream or you see somebody else do it. Use your own brain and your own eyes to determine what is actually going to work out for your team. You're welcome to try some of the stuff we do, but examples like playing out from the back with terrible passing center backs against Manchester City may not be the best move. When you try stuff like, for example, we want to run at defense because according to that thing Zealand mentioned earlier up here in the reports, if it had ever load, it says we're an incredible dribbling team like that, then tick it on for a couple of games and see how it plays within the tactic and everything else that you have going on. Because the real key to getting comfortable making your own tactic in Football Manager is just developing that understanding of how things are going to affect gameplay over time. And one of those understandings is how different player roles clash in the match engine. Now, this will change a bit every year. There's always a new role. There's always a rework of how a certain role works. And roles are, of course, when you click here and you see all of these different things like Carolero and Metsala. Well, there are some classic examples of roles that will conflict. For example, if I have an inside forward on the right, I typically would not want to make this player a Metsala. Another classic example would be a winger and a wingback with no underlap instruction. Or perhaps multiple free-flowing playmakers that are essentially going to try and get into the same spot of the field to receive a pass. All of these can work under the right conditions with the right player tendencies and perhaps the right mentality and other roles around it. They're just way more likely to run into each other and not allow you to create enough space or spread out the field. Yeah, honestly, having guys run into each other is just never good. We are trying to avoid traffic jams here. We want overloads. We don't want traffic jams. But how do you know if you've never used a role before? Well, if you click on the player and then hover over the role in that particular mentality, it will show you what that player is likely going to do in offense and in defense. Literally down in the bottom left, there's like a video representation. And you see how that little Metsala dot's going to kind of get in the way of an inside forward that's looking to and Robin their way onto the edge of the box? Yeah, that'd be a problem. There's something else to look out for with roles, because some of them are fluid and some of them are static, and you need both, because if you have all of one, you're going to be screwed. You see, there's a little thing in the bottom left that says team fluidity, but you can't click on it and you can't change it. The fluidity is reflective of what your roles are telling your players to do. Essentially of how restrictive those roles actually are. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, why do I want my roles to be restrictive? Well, you do. It's nice to know where certain players are going to be on the field. But if all of your players are way too restricted and predictable, it's easier to stop your tactic, and it restrains some of the creative agency of some of your better players. Now, my tactic is classified as structured on stream, and that's because I know what my players do really well, and I want them to do it repeatedly. But still, players like Bellarmino Secca, who's objectively like the best midfielder in the world in this save, well, I want him on advanced playmaker on support, which is a fluid role. A playmaker on support, particularly an advanced one, is going to be looking to move around to receive the ball. Even more fluid is a roaming playmaker. There are Romdeuters, F9s, Trequartistas that will increase the fluidity of your team. But if you have too many Romdeuters and false nines and Trequartistas and liberos and everything else, then you don't have enough structure. People are going to be floating all over the place to try and get involved in the play, and the moment the ball's gone, you're gone too. Drifting around's great until everybody's doing it. It's like the cool kid crowd. Not everybody can be cool, only a select number of people can be cool, I've been told. Some great static position examples are like ball-winning midfielder on defend. I know Rodriguez is going to set the edge for my team. He's not going to go too far forward. But another static position example is center mid on attack. I know every time we get the ball, he's going to go dashing up the field. He's set into doing that. It's where he's going to end up every time, is right in this corridor. So structure is not just for your rest defense, which is how your defense looks when you give the ball away. It's also for you to be able to create reliable pressure in certain areas. Like, for example, I know whoever's playing left center back for the other team is going to have a bad day. They've got Rejovic flying at him, they've got Endrick flying at him, and Seka's drifting around in front of them as well somewhere. Another great example is an advanced forward will always push the line. Always. That's what they do. They advance the line. Now, there's a couple of other situational things you'll want to consider when you're putting together your first tactic. A very crucial phase of play in the modern age is how you play out from the back. Most of your teams are going to be playing out from the back if you're not managing lower league and you're just hitting it up to the big man, right? And you need to understand how that's going to work. Defensive midfielders are particularly helpful. The way I usually break out of a press is my two fullbacks on support kind of drift into the half space behind the press. They can receive the ball. They either then go inside to Rodriguez or they go up the line to one of the two wingers. My fullbacks were on defend. That wouldn't work. They'd be too deep and it would be hard for them to connect with those wingers in some cases. But you'll get this as part of your highlights and matches a lot. Just pay attention to it because it's something that is very easily affected by your tactic. Because if all your midfielders are up, they're all on attack, and this guy's an advanced playmaker on support, it's going to be much harder for them to connect a pass. And if your wingers are on attack with no fullback that can carry the ball to them, it's going to be really hard for them to connect, and it's not your defense's fault if they have nowhere to go. And another situational thing is that core tactic, you're not just done once you come up with it. I mean, you can be. My brother's a very good football manager player, and he's used the same tactic for like 7 years, and he never changes it no matter what's going on in the match. And he wins a lot of stuff. You can do that, and you can be fine. But if you want to also win around the margins, you need to understand how to make your tactic more aggressive and more passive to help you either take it to the opponent or force a comeback, or obviously see out a game. See, this is the base tactic I've been using with Tottenham. We've had a bunch of tactics over this save. This is what we're using here. When I am losing against a team I feel I should be beating, I will set the tactic to something like this. Because this is what my tactic already looks like when I'm on the offensive. I'm just starting us there, especially against teams that play 5 at the back and are inviting more pressure. I can meet them further up the field. I'm using step up more. We can cut off their outlets to everything by just starting further up the field. And when I need to see the match out, I have that tactic training all the time. It's this one you've already seen. We shift our ball-winning midfielder down to a defensive midfielder, and we bring our number 10 back into a midfield trio. This depends on what your players are able to do, but you should be able to develop a way to create more pressure on the defense, essentially using the same system, and reducing the pressure that you're going to receive or the space you're giving the other team behind you by using the same system. Fortunately, all of my midfielders can play both the 10 and central midfield, so this switch is very easy for me. And after you come up with a change, assess how it works. If you're chasing a match and 4 straight matches you make the switch you think will work and you create no highlights, try something else. That's how you learn, that's how you get better, and that is how you make a new tactic on Football Manager. All on your own, from scratch. I wish you the best of luck. It adds so much depth to the game, and if you want something to put on in the background while you're playing FM, we made a video where we went to the Faroe Islands for a whole week to learn how a super tiny club made it into a European group stage. The Faroe Islands' first ever team to do so. I think it's the best video we've ever made, so check it out. And good luck with your tactic. See ya.